Do you want to use your scraps, or at least some of them? Maybe you have some items that are languishing about your art space or tucked away in drawers. And maybe you even want to create a journal that's a bit different to usual. If you do, then keep watching. I'm Kylie Koo, a mixed media artist, art journaler, book artist, and a maker of many things. In this video, I'm going to be making a journal with a bit of a difference, and it's going to be one of my journals that I'll be using continually throughout 2024. So I hope you'll keep watching and join me. So for this project, I'm pulling out a lot of scrap papers, basically old gel prints, drop sheets, the tiny bits of paper that I've torn off for other projects and the bits that's left. I'm pulling out some old 12 by 12 sheets of paper that I know I'm not going to use. I've also pulled out fabric scraps, etc. And I have there my resource folder that I made a couple of years ago, and I'll link to that below, in which I've got lots of different things tucked in. Manuscript pages, leaflets that have come through the post, etc. So we're going to pull all of these things out and start to use them. And I'm also going to start to pull out over the coming weeks some supplies that perhaps I haven't used in a while. So I'm really going to make my supplies work for me. And I would love if you would like to join me on this project. I'm going to encourage you to use what you have. You won't necessarily have the same things as me, but there are always alternatives. So please, if you are going to join in, just use what you have. And I hope that along the way I'll be showing you some tips and techniques. I've been looking back at some of my kind of favourite journals, my favourite artist books, and looking at how I made those, how I constructed them, and I've come up with this idea for a different type of journal for 2024. It is one that I will build over the weeks. In this video, I'll be making the front cover and also the first page, and this will be a no-sew journal. So all you'll need is some glue to stick things together and to stick things down. I'll be using a matte medium mainly. You could use a glue stick, although as I always say, if you're using a lot of wet medium on top of that, things may not stick quite as well. But again, use what you have and just try things out. So for my substrate, I'm going to be using these 12 by 12 pages I've had for ages, and I know that I'm not going to use them for anything else. So I've dug them out, and I'm going to cut these down into 4" by 5" pages. It will mean that I've got a piece left at the end, but that's okay because I will use those scraps at another point in this journal. So all I'm doing is I'm using my ruler just to tear these down. I don't mind rough edges on things. My journal that I'm making will be slightly grungy. Well, no, it will be grungy, let's face it. It will be grungy, but you don't have to make a grungy journal if you prefer a different style. This will be adaptable to your particular style. So just tearing those down, and in a moment I will show you what I'm going to do with them next. But basically from that one page I've got 6 pages and some little scraps that, as I say, I will be using them at another point in the journal. So I'll just be working on 2 pages. One is for the cover of the journal and the other will be the week 1 page, because I'll be doing a page every week of 2024. At least I hope that's the case. So all I've got here are some of my kind of roll-off sheets, and I'm just going to cover each side of my little pages. The 12 by 12 papers were not terribly thick, and I want to thicken them up for this particular journal. So I have put this on at double speed because it is quite a repetitive process. I won't put it on any faster than that though. I think it's still quite clear at this stage. Making sure that the page I stick down is fully adhered to or the sheet that I put down is fully adhered to my page. As I say, covering both sides of each page. I give the first side on each page a quick dry before I then turn over and glue onto the second side. There I'm just using an old piece of magazine that I had previously used for an image transfer. It had some paint on it, so no reason why I can't use that up here. I roughly cut the papers that I'm going to glue down onto my base sheet to the same size, but if there's a little bit of overhang I will take it off. I don't mind it again being a rough edge, but I want most of the pages to be more or less the same size, but little bits here and there absolutely fine, because as I say, I want it to be quite grungy. My paper there had stuck to my bottom sheet, my worksheet underneath a little bit. Doesn't matter, that will get covered up in the process. So I now want to add another layer because I want to thicken these pages up even more. This layer though, I'm going to start to do slightly smaller pieces. I still want most of the sheet to be covered, but I want to introduce some texture to my pages because I don't want my pages to be totally flat. So this was an old piece of, it was almost a piece of kind of thick tissue paper. Again, I've had it sitting in my stash for well, it feels like forever. It's been there a long time, and I'm just going to use this to help thicken my pages up. Some of this might show through in the final piece. If it doesn't, I don't mind. I'm not putting anything down in these first layers that are so precious that I mind if I cover them up. I'm now coming in with a third layer, and all I've done is to take some book pages and tear them into smaller strips. Again, I'm not covering the whole thing. I'm just going to place them around my substrate. Again, this just adds layers and will add texture to the final piece. So all of this is also strengthening my base layer. And once I finish these sides, I'll then do the exact same on the other sides. But once again, I will give it a quick dry before I actually turn over to the other side. I'm now going to add a fourth layer, and this time I'm using some scraps, gel printed pages, etc., where they're a little bit more decorative, and you know, I would quite like if some of these perhaps show through in the final page. But again, I'm not so wed to them that if they get covered up a bit, you know, it's not a big issue. But this is the point. This will be the last layer of paper that I'm basically putting on. So again, I'm going to do both sides, because with this journal, the way we construct it, there will be a back to the page and a front to the page. So again, just making sure that those are fully adhered. I don't want any of my layers lifting. If they lift a little bit, that's fine. I can always take care of that. But as far as possible, I want to make sure that they are well glued down. I'm not too bothered if the pages coordinate fully, you know, although some of them will go side by side. I think when I start to add the finishing touches, if I feel that they're jarring too much next to each other, then, you know, I'll have some tips for you on how to just make them sit nicely together. Pulling in some pieces of an old magazine that I'd used for image transfers. I'm using this here because it's a bit darker and just stands out against the others. But again, I will be in a later stage blending them in a bit more. But it's quite nice sometimes to have those little peaks of darker colour coming through. If I find any edges are lifting, then I'll just glue them down again. Sometimes it's those edges of papers that kind of miss out a bit on the glue. And again, just going over it completely, just to squeeze out the excess medium so that as far as possible there are no bubbles underneath. And again, I give this a very quick dry, but you'll see that when I turned it over to do the other side, I actually ended up lifting some paper as well. But I then basically continue with the same process on the other side. I am more or less using the same papers here as I used for the front. I don't need the two sides to match by way of papers, it's just that's what I chose to do on this occasion. I wanted to leave my pages dry for a good hour before moving back on. As it turns out, it was 2 days, but they're really nice and solid now and nice and dry before I move on to the next stage. And I'm going to be using my gel plate, but that is not essential. It's just my way of getting paint down quickly. So I have a look at the colours of my cards and decide what colours of paint I want to use. So I'm going to start with this pale olive green. This is a System 3 paint. And I'm basically going to brayer out a thin layer of paint onto my gel plate. Now, as I say, you don't need a gel plate. You could paint directly onto your card or put the paint onto another surface and monoprint in that way. So there you see, just started to pick up a bit of colour. It's filled in those little pieces where the paper had stuck previously. I'm turning the page over and just getting some of that colour on the back as well. I'll now put that to the side and let it dry for a little while, and all I'm going to do is put that excess paint down onto the drop sheet below. Turning to the next card, I should say next page, I'm going to use this phthalo turquoise, and again this is a System 3 paint. Now I put slightly too much down on here and I then wasn't actually absolutely certain about the colour that I'd used, but you'll see how I rectify that just shortly. So again, same technique here, I'm just pressing that down on one side. I felt it was too bright, despite it being a colour that I love. I thought it was too bright, but I'm not going to waste it, so I'm going to put that down anyway, because again it just builds another layer and I can go over the top of that if I feel that I want to knock it back a bit. So I'm looking at this and thinking, well, actually a bit of that paint colour might go well on here, and you see I'm just picking up little bits of it, so I'm not putting a full block on it this time, just picking up little bits here and there. And by introducing similar colours to both my pages, when they end up next to each other, they will sit well together because they do have those kind of common colours between them. They don't need to be identical, but one will pick up the colour of the others. But you know, variety is the spice of life, as they say, and if you want to make pages entirely different colours and not have them coordinating, that is absolutely fine. So I'm now using the System 3 Burnt Umber, and again I'm just going to add some of this to each page, both back and front, and this starts to allow the various collaged pieces to kind of meld together. It just helps bring the whole piece together. Again, not looking to put it in big blocks, just adding little bits here and there, and as some of the paint goes off the gel plate after it's been used on one page, it still leaves a nice kind of lighter impression when I pick more up. So just going round the two pages, trying to get a bit of that onto each. So now I'm going to add another layer of paint, and this time I'm using buff titanium. I often like to move between darks and lights, just to get some contrast across the page. Sometimes white is too stark to use on certain pages, and that's why I really like to use buff titanium quite a bit. So again, the same sort of process. Now you see that I deliberately put that over that dark piece on the page. I want some dark bits on the page, but not as the kind of big blocks. So there will be little bits peeking out, but in other areas the buff titanium will have just knocked it back sufficiently. And of course this is the sort of thing you can do over and over, introducing darks, introducing lights, or indeed introducing other colours. And again, I'll go over the two separate pages this way on both the back and the front. I now feel that I've got enough done by way of those backgrounds, and I will now give my pages a really good dry. So I'm not planning on either my journal cover or my first page to have a main focal image as such, but what I do want to add is some darker marks by way of using this stencil. I just got this stencil recently from Hobbycraft. I had received a gift card at Christmas time, so I have used that, and this is one of the products I bought. So again, I'm using the burnt umber. I'm not wanting to put anything too dark on here. I just want something that will be seen, and basically I just take different parts of the stencil and put it on to each page, both back and front, and I kind of use that sort of general, I don't want to call it a rule because it's not really a rule, but that kind of general principle or approach of putting it into 3 places. As I say, I will just do this on the back and the front of each of my pages. Again, this will help unify the pages when they sit next to each other. This is really quite a nice stencil. If it has a name on it, I will leave it below, and if I can find it on the Hobbycraft website, I'll leave a link to it. But it's got a number of different patterns, and it wasn't too expensive if I remember rightly. So yeah, I can see me using this over and over again. So I don't want to overdo it with the pattern, but equally I want sufficient around the page just that there will be something that's seen. The stencil also has a few music notes on it, so I added a few of those in places as well. Once I'd used the burnt umber through the stencil on all 4 sides, I then decided to add some gold, and this is a gold by Arteza. I just felt this would give little bits of contrast in a sense. Again, not putting on too much, letting some of it cover where some of the burnt umber stenciling had been, but again just kind of working around kind of 3 different places on each page. This again just adds another layer and adds interest. Once I covered all 4 sides, all I did then was to take a mix of the kind of gold and the burnt umber, and I just took that sponge and went around the edges of each page, just in case there was any bits of white sticking out. Not that that was a problem really, but I just thought it helps frame each individual page in its own way. I also took the sponge in some places across the face of the page if there was a little bit of white that I just wanted to kind of have it blend in a little bit more. At this point I decided to add some little white splatters. This is just a titanium white. I already had it sitting out on my palette from the day before when I was doing some painting. So I just added a little bit of water to it, used a fan brush, but you don't need a fan brush. You can use any type of brush for this, and just put those little splatters over it. I decided I didn't want too many. You never know what too many is until you've actually done it, but it was just something that gives a little bit of that kind of distressed and aged look to my pages. So again, dried in between before turning over to the next page, and just put the splatters on the other sides. So it was now time to look at how the pages join together. So as I say, I've got here what will be my front page and what will be my first page. So I took a little bit of time just to look at them both and just to decide which one I wanted as the kind of front page for the journal, and which would be my first page, and which one I wanted to kind of face up the way and to the back. So now to attach them together, I have here a piece of fabric. This came from Hobbycraft years ago. It came in one of their fat quarter packs, and I'm just going to cut this around about a strip around about 1 inch wide, and I'm just going to tear that down so it's got rough edges on it. And I cut the strip in half because it was long enough. I want to put a strip down one side of the cards and then down the other side. I'm going to leave some of those strings on just now, but I may take them off at another point. So there you'll see about 1 inch wide and about 4.5 inches. So about 3 centimetres by 11 centimetres. And I'm just going to use some of that 3-in-1 glue. It's a bit like Fabri-Tac to glue it together. So about 1/2 centimetre, 1/2 inch, no, 1/4 inch, sorry, gap in between the two, and all I'll do is to put some glue down both sides and then stick the fabric in place, and this will act as my binding for these two pages. My glue was a little difficult to get out, but I persevered and got there. So once the glue's in place, just making sure that my pages are lined up. I want roughly the same gap top and bottom. I put that onto the one side and then I flip it over and I do the same on the other side. And this will allow these two pages to be fully secured together. I want to add a word to what will be the first page of my journal, so not the cover page, the first page. And the word I wanted to add was grace. I put this down with a Posca pen in white and then suddenly realised that when I put my next binding on, it would go over that. So I quickly put some water on it and was able to pick it up. I also swapped the pen out for another one because I'd used a bullet tip and I decided to change to a fine tip. I actually ended up changing that again, but never mind. I'm not quite sure what to call my journal, so I ended up simply writing journal on the front. Not very original, but it was all I could think of. I may add to this in future, I just don't know yet. So if you would like to join in with me, can I invite you as a prompt for your first page simply to add a word that maybe has some meaning to you. Other than that, just use whatever supplies you have. You don't have to use stencil, you don't have to use a gel plate, use what you have. And hopefully I'll be back next week doing another page and I'll give you another prompt. So as always, thanks so much for watching. Do take care. Bye for now.